Okay, Kelvin O'Connor, you are a part of Atheist Ireland. At the end of every month, I think the last Saturday of every month, you've got a table that you have in Shop Street. That's the main shopping street in Galway, which is Ireland's second biggest city. And it's really just to raise awareness. So not just for believers, but for fellow atheists as well.
Absolutely. So we have kind of two aims at the table. One is just to promote atheism, and I think when I say promote, it's almost to destigmatize the word as well. It still has a lot of negative connotations for people, you know. And a lot of people are just surprised that we're willing to go out there and stand on the street with a big banner that says atheism on it, you know.
I suppose some theists will actually, take the word promote and say, you're trying to turn our children into atheists, but you don't mean promote in that way, making people atheists.
No. I mean, we would obviously endorse scientific and reason-based thinking. But aside from the atheism word that we're trying to destigmatize, the other part of what we do really is about campaigning for a secular, fair country for everybody, including minority faiths. Ireland has become a much more pluralist society over the last 20 years or so. But unfortunately, our laws are still catching up. Our government is still catching up, and as evidenced by the weekend, even our media is still catching up to the reality. People have moved on. And even though our census would say that we're 78% Catholic, the results of the marriage referendum in 2015 and the abortion vote this year shows that we're not a Catholic country anymore at all.
Now, I know that one of the previous popes, John Paul II, I think it was, he came to Ireland in, I think it was the 80s, and there was a huge reception for him. It went wonderfully well.
Yeah.
Now, this past weekend, which was the 25th and 26th of August, you had Pope Francis, the current pope. He came over hot on the heels of this Pennsylvania scandal, which was about 300 priests having been found to abuse over 1,000 children over several decades. And I think also a former Vatican diplomat had said that he should resign. And literally just as he was landing, all this was still in the air. And although he did get a really big reception, just like John Paul II did, this time there were protests, and you were at two of them, and this was the Stand for Truth protest. Is that right? Could you tell us a bit about that?
Correct. So I suppose before I even get into the protests, I'd like to just cover some facts and figures on the Pope's visit, because it's interesting and I think it sets the context.
Yeah.
In 1979, there was over 1 million people that got to see John Paul II. This time round, there was 500,000 tickets allocated for his mass in Phoenix Park, which is a large green area in Dublin. Of that 500,000, the best estimate suggests around 130,000 attended, roughly a quarter of what it could have been, or in fact an eighth of what it was in 1979. I would have to fact check this, but I believe that in 1979, over 1 million people would have been about 75% of the population, and I think 130,000 now is something in around 5% of the population. There's a huge decrease in that regard. They closed off 82 roads for this papal event. They disrupted the information on the bus services, so no one knew what buses were coming and going. They discriminated against non-Catholics by offering free bus and Lewis, the local tram service, for ticket holders to the event, but for no one else. It's crazy, really. It's understandable that there was protests. The protest I was at, the Stand for Truth, there was about 5,000 people at it.
Wow.
And we only needed one road closed off.
This was particularly focused on the redress for the victims of clerical sex abuse who remain uncompensated to this day.
The other interesting thing was we were there for about an hour and a half, close to 2 hours. And then we did a silent march through Dublin to the site of the last Magdalen laundry, which is owned by the state, but they're trying to sell it off. And we would argue that it should probably be kept and turned into a museum, so that we don't forget our troubled past, and that it's there to so others can learn from our mistakes, rather than trying to just erase it from history. Magdalene laundries are essentially where unmarried mothers were sent to essentially wash the laundry of priests and stuff, because they were no longer fit for society as deemed by the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Horrible places. Not a million miles essentially from gulags almost. And nearly all those are gone now. There's just one remaining, and we think it should be preserved as a marker in history.
Regarding Pennsylvania, there were so many reasons to protest already, and they were all organized months ago. It's really just a case of another in a long line of cover-ups by the church. So in that sense, it makes very little difference here. It may help somewhat with international media coverage of the protest, though, hopefully.
Yes. Two things to note as well. You will see in some of the news that it said the Pope begged for forgiveness. But at no point throughout his speech did he use the word sorry. All right. He has not released any names and anyone who's involved in the cover-up. He's looking for forgiveness, but he's not taken any action. Nothing has changed because of the weekend in terms of files or names or anyone that can be prosecuted. Nothing.
Is this just lip service? Is it just lip service?
It's literally lip service. But as regards the most recent accusation that you just mentioned there, he hasn't even given it lip service, because his response was, "I'm not going to say anything about that." Literally, I believe it was on the plane. Those recent accusations just came out Sunday afternoon. He was saying the mass. He was flying back Sunday evening. The reporters asking about it, and he literally said, "I'm not going to say anything about this."
I think it was, he said not one word.
Not
Is that
one
right?
Yeah.
So do you think really, Kelvin, that the Catholic Church is such a big entity that's been around for so long that it is in some ways immutable? Nothing can really penetrate it. Nothing can close it down. It's just, they can go on and on and on, and it will just continue. What do you think?
I think it might continue in the global south. 2/3 of Roman Catholics now live in the global south, and only 1/3 in the north, in the global north, that is. And that third is shrinking. And I think in 1979 we would have been considered one of the most Catholic countries in the world. And I don't think anyone looking at the events of the weekend or the recent referendums can say that about us now. And I think those trends are largely continuing in the global north. The Catholic Church might well continue to survive, but I think it's retreating to the global south, South America and places like that. And it's telling that Pope Francis himself is from South America, and in a lot of ways, he has good PR in the global north, and people even tend to think of him as being very progressive. But when you look at what he says, more so than his two predecessors, he talks about the devil. He's endorsed an organization of exorcists in South America, and that. So in some ways, I think he's quite progressive, and I think that might suit the global south a bit more than he does. So I think they're retreating. Yeah.
Right. So just going to go back to what you mentioned before about the blasphemy law, which unbelievably still exists in Ireland. So for anyone who doesn't know what that is, could you explain first of all what is meant by blasphemy, and what is the blasphemy law you have there, and what do you hope that will happen, and how you can help overturn that?
Okay, so our current blasphemy law, while it existed since the early 19th century, it was recently modified to, the early 20th century. And it was modified in 2009 by Dermot Ahern, because it was considered unprosecutable. The irony is that it's still basically considered unprosecutable. One of the things he added to it is that it has to cause significant public outrage. Now, that almost has no meaning in law. It's still basically unprosecutable. But at the same time, it's a very dangerous precedent to have any law that encourages outrage you can have a €25,000 fine as punishment for being a breach of this. So you're kind of putting a 25 grand bounty on moral outrage, which is.
And has this actually happened in recent times?
No, it has never actually been successfully prosecuted because, like I say, it's basically unprosecutable. But what it does it has a couple of other effects though. Media outlets, including newspapers and TV and all that, they have to be mindful of it, because even if it's not prosecutable, you can still obviously sort of take a case and incur legal fees trying to defend it. Nonetheless, there's always that danger. And also, you have countries like Pakistan, when they're brought before the UN Human Rights Council, will point out that Ireland has a recently passed blasphemy law, so it's hypocritical to criticise them for having one. The difference is, of course, is we're not going around chopping off hands or heads for our blasphemy law, and they do quite regularly, you know.
So you've got a lot on your plate at the moment, and you just come back from the Stand for Truth protests, and you're hoping to get something done with the blasphemy law. So, well, the year is quickly coming to an end. And what do you see for Atheist Ireland and progress in Ireland from now till 2019?
At the end of October, there will be a presidential election. And no conscientious atheist is eligible to run for that, because we have a religious oath, and your first act as president must be to swear in front of Almighty God and to ask Him to guide you. So an atheist would either have to lie, maybe cross their fingers behind their back as their first act, or just simply can't be president in the first place. You know, wow. So that's another little law that it needs to change as well. You know.
And do you think all these things eventually they will be water under the bridge?
Yes, I do. We have a precedent for that now after the marriage referendum, the abortion referendum, hopefully soon the blasphemy referendum, and there's slow but steady progress with schools, and the so-called baptism barrier has been made illegal now, and there's other minor changes come to the curriculum. So I think maybe in 5 or 6 years' time we'll be in a pretty good place, all going well.
Yeah, because it seems to be in the hands of the young people, and they are very different from the generations of the 40s, 50s, 60s. They seem to be, they're so much different to even back in the 80s and 90s. They're really progressive.
Yeah, it really has momentum now. I think, like I say, the referendums and even just the weekend, where the turnout was so much lower than I think anyone expected, really. It just proves that we're not really a Catholic country anymore, and we just need our laws and our media and our government to catch up with that fact.
Yeah, so I guess we'll just wrap up here. But if anyone wants to join Atheist Ireland, you don't have to be Irish. Like I said to you before, you don't have to live in Ireland. You can support in any way. So how would somebody go about that?
Yeah, so full details of everything we do and how to support us is on our website. Very easy to remember. It's just atheist.ie.
Atheist.ie. Very simple indeed, and that's good. And so hopefully, yes, everything that we spoke about will come to fruition, and a lot of progress in Ireland will happen soon. It's been happening very, very swiftly. So I have no doubt that in a few decades, Ireland will be a very different place.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, Kelvin O'Connor, thank you very much indeed.
Mark, it's always a pleasure.